Right, so my name is Gerald, and I'm the Business Development Manager at Pledge. And the topic for today is supply chain carbon emissions, where to start. Um, and the question really is, why should you care? And why do your customers care about this, particularly if you're a shipper? How to navigate the measurement journey, and we'll briefly talk through how you can get started today. And so, what's the problem? And what's really clear is that we're in a climate emergency. And really here I'm trying to tug at your heartstrings a little bit. Europe has had one of the worst droughts in over 500 years. And this is actually impacting logistics industry, not just us in our personal lives. And what we see is that because of this, there's growing pressure, both from customers who have set these ambitious net zero targets and will primarily focus on the scope 3 emissions from their supply chain, but also from the tsunami of legislation that will come from the EU, from the UK government, as they try to push forward their sustainability targets that they've set countrywide. And we already know about the pressure from investors, from employees, from consumers on being a sustainable business. And so these pressures are imperative. And I think sustainability often falls into the conversation of this is the right thing to do, you should care about this because of your grandkids. But actually what we see is that this is becoming a business imperative. And so the question is, why do your customers care about this? Or why do you care about this as a business? And we'll take an example of a well-known brand like Doc Martens. And so in their emissions, there are three main categories: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And Scope 1 emissions talks about the direct emissions that a company has from things that they own. So their offices, the energy that they use in those offices, etc. Scope 2 emission is focused on the indirect emissions that they have from buying energy. And Scope 3 emissions is the indirect emissions that they have from their value chain, whether that's investments they make as a business or their supply chain, upstream or downstream transportation. And as you can see from the example of Doc Martens, who's a well-known brand, I don't personally own a pair, but I've heard good things. You can see that 99% of their emissions are Scope 3 emissions. So as a business, the only way for them to reach their net zero targets that they've set is to work directly with suppliers that will help them meet this objective. So for any business involved in logistics, whether that's warehouse operations, whether that's as a freight forwarder or as a freight operator or as a carrier, your brands and customers will look to you to help them on this journey. So this will increasingly become table stakes. But we recognize that this is an easy thing for logistics businesses to tackle. We know that the regulatory environment is evolving and it's hard for organizations to keep up on what the requirements are. We know that logistics businesses are good at logistics, they're not sustainability experts, so they don't have the in-house expertise to navigate this. And we also know that the journey of building a sustainability strategy can be complicated. There's complex frameworks to consider, methodologies, and the solutions out there can be expensive as well. And so we've established that there's a climate emergency. We're all impacted by this. I've bought 10 fans for my house. We're all feeling it, personal lives. But it's also impacting our businesses in the logistics industry, whether that's the delays in ports because of heat waves or rivers drying up, causing shipping lanes to shut down. And this pressure will be applied from customers, other stakeholders, for businesses to take actions. And so how do we take action today? And there's a journey for taking climate action. And it takes 4 key steps, whether you're a business or whether this is on behalf of your customers. And the first step is you need to measure. And as they say, you can't manage what you can't measure. And once you understand the climate impact and the emissions that are generated from your activities, you can look for opportunities for how to reduce those emissions. For any emissions that you can't reduce, you can remove those emissions by purchasing carbon offsets or looking at options like sustainable fuels and other removal strategies. And of course, throughout that process, you need to report this actively to customers, to investors, to other stakeholders, and you might have to comply with mandatory reporting as well. So this is that journey that your customers are on, this is the journey that you need to be on as a business, and so we'll focus on that phase one, which is establishing emissions reporting. And I've broken down that measurement journey, I like to call it, into 3 steps. The first step is you need to set goals and objectives. Why are you measuring? Do you want to share this with customers as part of customer reporting or in their dashboards? Do you need to measure internally for your own strategy? Do you have mandatory reporting that you need to comply with? You need to set a clear objective of why you need to measure. And that will inform the type of data that you need to collect. Do you have primary data from vehicles that you own? Do you have activity information from data that you have as part of your operations? And that all helps to understand what type of data you need to collect. And of course, you then need to actually measure the emissions as well. And there's a whole host of methodologies that come with that. And so if we focus on that first step, there are 2 main reasons to measure. One is I plan to use this internally to inform my business. And so here you can get away with a high-level analysis, top-down approach. Hey, we do this much activity, we move this much freight, let's multiply that with a number, and that's an estimate. And these top-down estimates can be a really good place to start when you don't have good expertise around the area and can give you an indication of where to focus your efforts. But once you need to start to use this for external stakeholders, the bar is much higher. And so if you want to use this for customer reports, if this is part of regulatory reporting, or if you need to start to drive operational changes, then you really need to start to do a bottom-up approach where you look at activity-based information, fuel usage, and start to use accredited methodologies. And ideally, you want external reassurance for what you're doing. You don't want to mark your own homework, right? And so you need to start to seek external support for this. And once you've established that basis of how we want to approach this, you need to measure the right things. And so here, the approach and the mindset should really be, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So the quality of what you measure and the granularity of what you measure is directly related to the output that you get. And so the recommended approach, if we take freight emissions, is to get shipment level activity to build this accurate reporting. And so if we take an example of a typical freight movement across 3 legs, you might have a road leg as the pre-carriage, you might have the main carriage by sea freight, you might have the on-carriage as a rail leg. And so for each shipment, in the absence of knowing exactly how much fuel was used, which in most situations you don't know, you need to understand the distance that's been traveled, the weight of the goods that you're moving, and the types of vehicles that you've used. And the more granular and the more accurate this information, the better the calculation. What's even better is if you can dig deeper into the data and start to understand, hey, if I've moved goods by sea freight, what's the IMO number of the ship? And that gives me a much better emission factor for that type of ship versus a general cargo ship. If I've moved goods by air freight, do I have the flight number? And that gives me the characteristics of that plane, the cargo to passenger ratios, and a more accurate emission factor for that calculation. And so when you start to dig into this data, you start to realize what data you need to generate accurate emissions. And then you need to navigate the methodologies and frameworks that exist for calculating these emissions. And what's really helpful in logistics is that over the last couple of years, and this is in the last 5 years or so, there's been a groundswell of activity primarily driven by bodies like the Smart Freight Center to start to build common frameworks in logistics for measuring emissions. We don't want one business measuring one way, another business measuring another way. And so these standards now exist that provide the emission factors, the methodologies, the assumptions that you should make based on real-world data to calculate these emissions. And so as an organization, you can look at these methodologies and find the one that applies best to you. The crucial thing, particularly in logistics, is that whatever methodology you use, it needs to be both global and multimodal. We want to be able to confidently measure freight movements, whether they're coming from somewhere deep in China to the UK or somewhere in South America to North America. And so how do you implement this? And there's a couple of strategies and options available. The first is a free calculator. Everyone loves a free calculator. And this gives you a quick overview over your emissions. You can get started very quickly, but is not suitable for external use because it does lack in accuracy, and often the methodology is fairly naive, so you have limited transparency around how that's done. The second option is to look for an in-house tool or build an in-house tool. And this is really helpful for building a custom methodology based on how your business operates. If you're a freight operator who owns some vehicles but also is doing some forwarding, if you have a warehouse operation and you do some fulfillment and own some transport, you can build solutions that work best for your business. The challenge that you have is that this can be very resource intensive. You need those expertise internally, and also these standards and frameworks are constantly updated. So once you build something, you now have to maintain it. And then the third option is using and leveraging a third-party provider like Pledge. And there, you really want to seek someone who gives you an accredited methodology that is acceptable to enterprise customers, that is acceptable to investors. You want someone who provides the third-party assurance around your methodology that checks your homework or does your homework for you. And you want someone who can give you the scale globally. Of course, there are some limitations and drawbacks. You have to pay for it, first of all. But you can't get it to work exactly for your business, so you have to work within their framework. And so this is where we slot in as a business. Pledge handles all the complexities of building accurate shipment-level emissions calculation. We offer a marketplace of carbon removal and offsetting solutions for customers that frankly can't do anything about those emissions, right? We don't have electric planes, unfortunately. We don't have electric ships, cargo ships. So for the customers that want to offset, there's an option there. And we also offer reporting that can be shared with customers and can drive your own strategy as well. And this can be embedded directly into your business, helping you build a lasting competitive advantage and demonstrate your sustainability leadership. And now, you don't have to take my word for it, and I'll show you an example of that. But hooray, you've done it. If you follow those steps and that journey, you have accurate and granular emissions. And these can start to be leveraged with customers and for internal use. But the question is, what next? What do I do with that information? And so this information and this reporting and these estimates can start to drive opportunities for operational improvements. You can identify hotspots and look at where you can reduce emissions. You can set internal targets for your own reduction strategy, but you can also work with your customers and help them with their reduction strategies as well. And so this can both drive internal improvements, but also help you stand out as a business, whether you're bidding for work and sustainability is a requirement in an RFP, or you want to signal to the market that you understand this issue and you take it seriously as well. And you don't have to take my word for it. We are already working with logistics businesses, primarily freight forwarders, freight operators, and as well as shippers, and we're helping them on this journey. And an example of that is Zen Cargo, who is a digital freight forwarder that works primarily with brands like Made.com and well-known shippers. And in the last 6 months alone, we've helped them establish this sustainability leadership by embedding CO2 footprint measurement into every shipment that they do on behalf of their customers. They now support about 60 customers, providing monthly reporting to their customers, having monthly meetings where they can talk about strategies to reduce their emissions. And they've reported to us that they've won 3 tenders in the last 3 months where sustainability was a key requirement. And they've even been shortlisted for a sustainability award, working with one of their shippers. So you can see some of the impact of embedding a simple solution around sustainability, like carbon footprint measurement. And so just to wrap things up, we know what the steps are to take climate action, and you can start anywhere and start really simply. We know what the journey looks like to build emissions reporting, and where you need to look for an internal tool or where you need to look for a third-party tool. And we have some examples of how you can start to use this information. And so where do you start today? I think it's really important to educate yourself. We have some materials, and I can share this slide after with you. Read and engage. There's lots of resources out there. You can also join logistics-related coalitions around sustainability. Logistics UK have a Route to Net Zero coalition. The Smart Freight Centre have a Sustainable Freight Buyer Alliance. And there's loads of these bodies coming up where you can share best practice and understand what others are doing in the market. But I encourage you to go away from this conversation and talk and engage with people in your business. Talk to your customers, understand what their sustainability needs are. Talk to your operations and IT teams and understand the data that you already have in the business that you can leverage to create this reporting. And talk to the wider business and understand what their sustainability strategy is. And then lastly, get started. You can use a tool like Pledge for free and already start to measure your emissions and share that with customers and get feedback. If you don't want to spend any money, you can also use other free calculators like the GHG protocol. But the message is you can get started today. And whether it's because a customer wants to do it or because you're thinking about your children and your grandkids, I think it's really important that we all take action today. And so I'll leave you with this call to action. We have some free socks and some coffee cups at our stand, at stand 5G N5. Come along and collect one or grab one from my colleague, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you about what we do. Thank you very much. Any questions, anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned it's an accredited methodology you're using. What do you mean by this? Who accredits this?
Okay, so the gentleman asked, when we say an accredited methodology, what methodology are we using? And let me just skip back. So for logistics-related emissions, the gold standard methodology that currently exists is something called the GLEC framework, or Global Logistics Emissions Council. And they have essentially gathered methodologies for sea freight under something called the Clean Cargo Group, air freight with something called the ADCAR methodology, and in the US there's something called the Smart Way factors developed by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And so they've brought all of these frameworks together, and they give you a set of emission factors based on real-world use of cargo ships, of planes, and these emission factors are updated on a bi-yearly basis. And so these are the standards that currently exist, but also there are standards for warehouse operations, and there are ISO standards being produced currently. There's a new ISO standard that will be available later this year for transportation logistics. I can share it with you after. Yeah.